For trafficking survivors, the vast majority, some studies say 96, others say 98%, were abused starting around between the ages of 3 and 8, sexually abused.
Jesus.
Which means that they literally have no memory of not being exploited. The most challenging aspect of being in the anti-trafficking movement is not being discouraged or feeling like we're losing. Because I've been in this work for 12 years now. And in 12 years, our hope is that we would see a reduction in trafficking. Our hope is that we would see the needle move in the right direction. Because more people are aware of it, more people are talking about it, and it is just not the case. In fact, in 2019, the Network, it's an organization that monitors brothels throughout the US, identified 8,000 brothels. And in fact, most of them were shut down during the pandemic. So there was conversations around how do we keep them closed? Like, what an incredible opportunity. And instead today, they've identified 11,000 brothels that are open and thriving. The needle is moving in the wrong direction. And that is one of the hardest components of this, is 12 years of getting calls from a nun in Philadelphia who's saying, I just found a 12-year-old pregnant girl who's being forced into prostitution and I don't know what to do with her. 12 years of getting calls from people saying, I've been locked in this hotel room for 2 weeks, getting 15 to 20 men walking in that door, and I need help. And 12 years of seeing those numbers rise and rise and rise. It's hard and it's discouraging. When we say human trafficking, people might have seen the movie Sound of Freedom, they might have seen the movie Taken, and so they expect these victims to be cowering, sitting in a corner, shivering, hoping to be unnoticed. And what most people don't know is the survivors that I know, that I call my friends, are some of the most courageous and vivacious people I've ever met. That you would never know that they've experienced more trauma than we will ever comprehend because they've overcome their trauma and are thriving. You know, with Sound of Freedom, I wouldn't say that they got it wrong. I think that it was actually pretty inspiring. And some of the criticism with the movie is that it doesn't represent so many other examples and stories. And I think for some, Sound of Freedom is their story. But honestly, for the vast majority of trafficking victims here in the United States, it was not a rescue situation. It was not a forced situation. They weren't kidnapped, they weren't locked in cages. It was brutal for sure. But for so many victims here in the United States, which Freedom Signal has identified over 282,000 victims in the US. What we know is the majority of them just wanted to be loved. I remember a young girl who came up to me speaking at an event that was just for foster kids, where I kind of shared the basics of what human trafficking was, and she walks up to me and she said, that was my story. I was trafficked. In fact, it was my foster dad that trafficked me. And she looked me in the eye and she said, but you know what? He never starved me. He never hit me. And he never even yelled at me. That man said, I love you. And I was so desperate for his love. I was so desperate to have someone that cared for me, that I did anything he asked to experience that love. And if I was not compliant, if I did not walk into that door, if I did not get into that car, he withheld his love from me, and it devastated me. So the next time he walked me to a door, the next time a car pulled up, I got in as quickly as possible because I didn't want to do anything that would make him not love me. I was desperate for it. Some of the changes that I've seen over the past 12 years is the increased vulnerability of young people because of the increased accessibility of social media. Because if you're a parent right now and you are not talking to your young people about the dangers of predators on social media, then you are causing a disservice to your children. every single presentation I have ever done to middle schoolers or high schoolers, where I've asked, have you gotten a message from a random person that says, hey, or I like your smile, or you're cute, let's connect? When I ask that question, inevitably more than half of the classroom raises their hands. So they are getting the questions, they're getting the messages, they're getting reached out to by predators. And here's the consequence. This happened a few years ago in Anne Arundel County. 12-year-old girl, disgruntled with her family. Which 12-year-old girl is not disgruntled with her family? Gets a message on social media from a 19-year-old boy in North Carolina. And they start a 9-month grooming period. I call it grooming because he starts wooing her, asking her favorite color, asking what show she likes to watch, eventually moving into the I love yous. Here's a 12-year-old girl that has the love of her life, painting this picture of what life could look like when he rides her off into the sunset caring for her. And so she and him decide that she's going to come and live in North Carolina with him, and they're going to live happily ever after. And so he sends her a bus ticket, and she doesn't tell anybody about it except for one friend. But that one friend told a teacher, and that teacher knew what was happening, called the local vice officer. The vice officer stopped her from getting on that bus, but he didn't stop there. He also contacted law enforcement in North Carolina, where they went to pick the guy up that was in North Carolina. And surprise, he was not a 19-year-old boy, he was a 28-year-old man, and she was going to be the 5th girl in his stable. Her life would have been completely and utterly different had that friend not told a teacher that recognized the signs and knew what to do. And so, as we increasingly become more accessible through social media, we have to recognize that young people are vulnerable. And it just takes one message that maybe all they say is hey, and their life is completely and utterly devastated. There are dozens of websites right now that I can order a human and I can choose their eye color, their bust size, their ethnicity, their age, and be here within minutes. The only thing I have to do is click a button that pops up that says, are you over the age of 21? Yes, I am. Do you know what you have to do to buy a puppy? You have to have a home visit. You have to prove that you have the means to get their vaccines, that you have a vet lined up. I mean, it is a week-long process this is from a rescue place. It is so tedious to get a puppy, and yet I can purchase a human being within minutes. I don't need the conspiracies of Wayfair. I don't need the conspiracies of Pizzagate in the basement, because it's so easily available anywhere you look if you just know where to look. You tell me your zip code and I will show you all of the brothels and illicit massage parlors within a walking distance to you right now. I don't know that we could be as impactful as we have been if it weren't for collaboration. If we're not working with service providers or social workers that understand what it means to speak the same language as these victims, alongside law enforcement who have the authority and the ambition to go after the perpetrators and the buyers and the traffickers, and then those that are caring for the survivors as they overcome their trauma. And so I think of a dear friend of mine, Dr. Gilmore, who works for Homeland Security in Alabama, who, when they do a sting to go and identify trafficking victims, because they know where it's at, they always bring alongside them an advocate, whether it's a survivor themselves, so they can say, listen, I know where you've been because I've been there, so that the victim isn't terrified, because law enforcement can be intimidating, can be scary. And so Dr. Gilmore always brings an advocate with him so that the survivor or the victim feels safe in interacting with law enforcement. And then they also have a partnership with the local aftercare providers, to where for more than 2 years, that victim, at no expense to themselves, can work with leading psychologists, with counselors, can create friendships with other victims, can learn a skill set to help earn an income, can reconcile with their families, get custody of their kids. I mean, this is a long road of recovery, right? Like when you've been treated as nothing more than commodity, when you've been traded around as if you were a cow, that you've been branded. So many survivors have been branded with tattoos, whether it's on their neck. I've known one that it was their eyelids that had their pimp's name tattooed on the eyelids when she tried to escape because he didn't want anybody to think that she owned herself. If we don't work together, law enforcement doesn't speak the language, and so that victim is going to be terrified, and they're not going to feel safe enough to speak up on what's actually happening to them. If you only have the advocate, they can't go into a hotel and bust down a door because they're just an advocate or the survivor themselves. If you just have the service providers, who's bringing them the referrals? So it has to be a continuum of care. It has to be a continuum of collaboration where it starts from one and hands off and hands off and hands off to the point where they don't need a handoff anymore and they can go and thrive and live an incredible, happy life. Here is my greatest advice. You've heard the call, you've had the compassion, you want to engage. Don't do it on your own. Because what you might think is the answer could cause harm. And I've seen too many people start their own nonprofit, engage in this work without being trained or equipped. And so you have to learn the lessons the hard way. But the problem with learning the lesson the hard way in this field is that your lessons are someone's life or death impact. I can tell you countless names that are literally dead because they didn't get the help that they needed, because people did not know how to serve them well. So learn from others before you engage in this. We want you, we need you, and learn from others.